Thanks so much. From what you just heard from Robert, you can just imagine the long shadows the pandemics is going to throw over the academic and social well-being of young people over the years. So the question really is how to reopen schools safely, as quickly as possible, and not just to build back better, but to build forward differently. And it's not just about reopening school doors. It's particularly disadvantaged students will need a lot of tailored and sustained support to get really back on track. And so I want to show you some more statistics. Keeping schools safe requires measures that schools can implement with their existing infrastructure. You can think of better hand hygiene or air ventilation, but it also takes measures that require more investment and also more coordination between education and other sectors. And as you can see here, most countries that responded to the survey made those extra efforts. For example, the use of physical distancing or self-isolation and tracking of staff and students who are exposed to the pandemic. But when you look carefully at this, activities that require additional investment or better coordination with other sectors, such as contact tracking, COVID testing, waste management, safe transport, and so on, you can see a lot lower rates of adoption. And when you look at the blue segment, now you can see that low-income countries actually struggle the most with the more expensive and coordinate-intensive activities, and also with actually access to the most basic disease mitigation measures. So that's obviously a big challenge. And remember, what I just showed you were the measures countries announced. When you actually look at what was actually implemented, the gap becomes a lot larger. Now, while 79% of high-income countries indicate that health and safety guidelines were being implemented in all schools, you see here only 1 in 4 respondents from low-income countries report universal implementation. So a lot to be done. And the reasons for the implementation gap are actually also quite clear. You can see here a lack of safety culture among the public is a quite common reason, but it's particularly actually also in low-income countries, but also lack of resources, medical facilities in the community. And those countries also rely more heavily on external donors for the resources they need for safety of school staff and learners. You have 80% of respondents from low-income countries citing external donors as a source of funds, compared to just 22% of high-income countries. And then, of course, school opening doors is one thing, but that alone doesn't ensure that actually students come back. So we looked at this as well. Students, particularly the disadvantaged, will need a lot of tailored, sustained support to help them, catch up, readjust. And that may also require support to address mental health, gender-based violence, other issues that actually escalated during those school closures. Many children returning to school will simply not be ready for the curricula that were maybe quite appropriate before the pandemic. So they need remedial instructions, support to get back on track so that the inequality is not further amplified. The good news is you can see that here is that even short-term remediation when children return to school can actually reduce long-term losses by half. So I think there's a good case to actually invest intensively for a short period of time. And then there's progress. 2/3 of the countries in our survey that in our last survey did not implement a remedial program actually reported one in the current survey. You can see over 6 months, a lot has happened in many countries. Our analysis also shows that student well-being is much harder to recover than learning losses. And again, I think we still have to come to grips with this. And then finally, there is money. The pandemic, obviously, we talked about it the whole day, is a double challenge to global education financing. All the contingency measures that are just, introduced to reopen schools safely, they cost money. And at the same time, governments are under very heavy financial pressure, and that's not going to go away in the next years. The financing gap to achieve education SDGs by 2030 is estimated to 200 billion as a result of the COVID. But what you can see here, and I wanted to highlight this, many actors actually chipped in with additional resources. You have seen here external donors, reprogramming of previously earmarked or restricted funding, additional allocations from the government. That's the blue bar here. So there's been a lot of additional money coming in. But let's not celebrate too early. We have seen the same pattern in the financial crisis. When the crisis hit in 2008 and GDP collapsed, spending on education
Indeed.
increased, but just for a short time. So thank you again and again. It was a pleasure for the OECD to be part of this great international collaboration.